Oh, hello everyone. Thank you for joining me for a call to discuss the market in COVID-19 and most importantly, the topics, things to know as a first-time home buyer. A little bit about myself. I am a real estate broker with Compass. This is my sixth year in real estate. And before real estate, I was in finance and I was in a part of finance that's also housing related. I structured and traded mortgage bonds that were backed by the homes I sell today. I left finance in 2014 and have been in real estate since. It's been a great journey. All right, let's get right into it. So the market in COVID-19 is under a lot of pressure. There's not a lot of new things happening. And right now, if you were to go out there to buy an apartment, you could probably, and you should, get a sizable discount. Now, this is sort of talking about some of the positive forces and the negative forces overall, because we have the recession, unemployment, and less foreign buyers. Yes, market is under a lot of pressure. But in the meantime, there isn't a lot of inventory, especially resale inventory in the city. So that's gonna keep a bottom on where how much prices can fall. We're gonna have more buyers once we reopen. Even now, we have more buyers who want to take advantage of the current situation than sellers who are willing or need to sell into it. Inventory is what I mentioned, because inventory ultimately shapes the direction of any market. Here we do have a pretty, it's really twofold. It's two sides of the coin. On one side, in new construction, we have oversupply, and that is what caused our market to peak in 2015. And in Manhattan, the market has been declining since 2015. Only recently, towards the end of last year, our market started to gain its footing. We have a lot of transactions happen between end of last year to early this year before the crisis hit. Prices had not recovered, but usually you have the volume leading the price action first. Right? So we were hoping to see prices recover probably by now, but unfortunately we have the health crisis. And then this is sort of for anyone, whether it's for your own home, even it's your own home, you should also pay attention to its investment value. Real estate as an investment returns on average 4% every year in New York City. This is just from 2010 to 2020. I've done the same calculation going back to 1997. It's the same thing. But you really need to plan on holding your real estate for a long period of time, right? You can't be thinking, okay, I'm going to buy and sell in 3 years and have it appreciate 4% a year. If you had bought in 2015 and try to sell it now, it's not pretty. This is dollar per square foot for different neighborhoods. It's still a little bit different. I think for first-time home buyers, if you were to live there, the primary concern should be which neighborhood you feel more comfortable and you want to live in, because the utility value is still what's most important, and the investment value comes second. Regardless, this is a dollar per square foot across some of the different neighborhoods in Manhattan. So the ones that you suspected were expensive are there. West Village is up there. Tribeca is expensive. Chelsea, Flatiron. So these downtown neighborhoods are pretty expensive. Upper West Side is also pretty expensive. It's more expensive than Upper East Side. This is talking about price change for the different neighborhoods from last month versus from last year. So we want to just pick a couple of periods and see how neighborhoods have performed versus each other. Again, this is just 2 periods, right? So don't take it too seriously. But what we see is for the same downtown neighborhoods that were expensive, they just keep appreciating. This is the sort of in the world of stock investing, established neighborhoods tend to enjoy better resistance and better liquidity. All right. So from this point on, we're going to cover a few topics that should be interesting to first-time home buyers. First up is how to negotiate a deal. How do you, especially now, right? We think we can, as buyers, we can get a large discount. So how do we go about doing this? The first step really is to do your homework. Before you even start talking to the other side, you and your agent should sit down and do the comps and come up with a fair market range, market price range for the target property. It's never going to be down to the penny and shouldn't be. It should be a range. And then in a normal market condition, you would go in on the low end of the range because you don't want to be perceived as too crazy in terms of your offer, and then you negotiate from there. Then at that point, it's more of a technical thing. It depends on how much competition you have, whether there are other offers. If you are the only game in town, then chances for you to get a better deal are much higher. And in this particular market, I think we can certainly go through the low end of the range by quite a bit just to see, to test the water, to see how much and um, how much the seller it needs to sell. And on the flip side, in 2015, 14, during the peak market, when the market was upward trending, and then a lot of cases we had to buy apartments during bidding war, almost always we had to go through the high end of that range to get a deal. So this is how market moves upward and downward. Right? We start with what the past comps tell us, and then we add in what the market feels like. Another piece of the puzzle is your agent should really get a good sense of what the sellers are working with. What are some of the things sellers are important to the sellers? If they're not as important to you, then you can use those points to your advantage, right? So maybe you pay a smaller price, but then you give the seller something that are important to them. Okay, this is in terms of negotiation. Timeline, how long does it take to get an apartment? The process really is broken into two parts. The first part is the search. The second part is after you go into contract, there is the whole, you have to babysit the transaction across the finish line. The search part, it really varies. I went out, I bought my first apartment on the second trip out. I just knew what I wanted. For average buyer, the search process takes 5 to 6 months. People need this much time to go out into the field to look and just to see, one, to get comfortable with what the market has to offer, with sort of work those into their wish list. Everybody comes out of the gate with this big long list of what they want, and it's disappointing to see the market has not that much to offer. So it takes time for people to reach that compromise comfortably, and then people also need that time to get comfortable with pricing. So you go out, you see enough apartments, and sort of get a sense of what every apartment is priced. And then when you get to your apartment, the apartment that you are interested in, you have a good sense of how much it should be worth. Obviously, it needs to get fine-tuned with comps and with your agent's help, get to the very detailed levels, but then you get a good sense already. That's why people need some time. Let's get to the next slide. So right, people start with browsing online and then go into the field 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 3. This 6 weeks is definitely on the shorter end. Like I said, average person needs 5 to 6 months. And then before you go out, I think the first thing you should do is to talk to the bank and get a pre-approval. A pre-approval serves two purposes. The first purpose is to let the buyer know how much apartment you can afford, right? How big of a loan you're qualified for, especially in this changing times as banks are changing their requirements. I think it's very important to talk to a bank to get that sorted. And then the second purpose of pre-approval serves is when you're ready to make an offer, you will need the pre-approval to go along with your offer. Most sellers in New York City won't engage you. They won't start a negotiation with you until they see a pre-approval. Otherwise, they don't think you're serious or they don't think you're qualified. Then they don't want to waste their time. So once you find your dream apartment, we go into the contract stage. The contract stage is where the buyer's attorney goes through due diligence to make sure everything checks out, the building checks out, apartment checks out, finances are okay, there are no major defects. And then they also work on the contract language with the seller's attorney. So the contract stage is 2 to 3 weeks. If everything works satisfactory, then you sign the contract, buyer signs the contract with a 10% deposit. Now there is a step called home inspection. In New York, if you're buying a condo unit in a big building, I would say, in my experience, less than 50% of the buyers actually hire an inspector. And reason being, unlike a house where you will be responsible for everything, in which case you should 100% hire an inspector and understand what kind of roof you're getting, what condition the major systems are in, the heating, electric, plumbing, right? Because these are all expensive systems to maintain or replace. But in the case of a condo unit, all of those prior items are the building's responsibility. Of course, it's good for you to know because you still have to pay your share of maintenance. If you knew, okay, roof needed to be replaced in next year, then you knew either there needs to be a reserve fund or you probably should expect an assessment, right, coming up. But away from that, the inspector is not going to be able to tell you too much away from whether the appliances work, how much electric you're getting into your apartment. So less than 50% of the condo buyers get an inspections, and it's 100% up to you. If you want to be very assured, then you should hire an inspector. They cost anywhere from $600 to a little over $1,000 for an average condo unit. All right, so once we have a signed contract, there are two things that need to happen in parallel. First thing is for your bank to finalize your mortgage. So once you get into contract is when you officially apply for a mortgage. You talk to them first, get a pre-approval, but nothing is official until you officially apply and pay the money, the processing fees to the bank. So they start working on your credit and the building, and then they will issue you a commitment letter to say, okay, they are committed to lend you the money. And then from the commitment letter, they still need a few weeks to get to clearance to close, to officially release the funds. And then they need to still check a whole long laundry list of items that they have everything from you. Everything's up to date, and the second thing that happens alongside the bank approval is a building approval. So you and your agent will work together to put together the building application, where you will typically be required to provide employment verification, your tax returns, some reference letters from your friends and professional contacts. So these two things happen, and then they take 1 to 2 months, sometimes 2 to 3 months. Once we have the approval from the bank and the approval from the building, then we will close. So the whole process from contract to closing is typically 2 to 3 months if you do financing. If you go all cash, then it's just the building approval, then it comes down to 1 to 1.5 months. That was timeline. Let's talk about mortgage. We talked about mortgage already for a bit. One thing I definitely want to mention is you should probably talk to a few banks, even though the rates are in a very tight range. In general, banks, they compare themselves all the time. So they don't wait you to tell them, okay, you're too high. They know where they stand. And they take a position because maybe they don't want that particular loan product, right? So maybe chases their rates higher for a smaller loan because they want less of that loan on their balance sheet. So rates are a little bit different across different banks. Also, in terms of the reserve funds, banks are different. The fees are quite similar. So you should talk to a few banks. And in the beginning stage, you don't really need to. You just need to talk to one bank and get one pre-approval. But then when you go into contract, you should talk to a few banks to choose one to officially apply with. Because then at that point you have to pay some money to get the process started. And then another important thing about a mortgage is when to lock your rate. Um, it's important because typically the free rate lock period is 60 days. And as we said before, from contract signing to closing is typically longer than 60 days. So if you go and lock your rate as soon as you go into contract, you are probably you will run out of your free period before you can close. If the world is the world that we've been in the last year, 2 years, where rates are the same and declining, it wouldn't have mattered. But if we were in the rate environment in 2018, when rates were increasing, then you have a problem, right? So you're out, then you are faced with the decision, an option of one, to extend your rate lock, which will cost you money. Anywhere every week you have to pay 1,000, maybe even more than $1,000, depending on how quickly or how high the rates are increasing. um, or you get out and you pay whatever the going rate is. Neither are great options, because you could have locked a lower rate in the 1 month before. So I think rate lock is a decision that you should talk to once you go into contract, once you start applying, you should talk to your mortgage banker, and then you should talk to your real estate broker to get a sense of, and most importantly, what the rate market is like, or what do we think the rate's going to do in the next 2 to 3 months, to decide when is a good time to lock your rate. Upfront costs. The upfront cost to buy an apartment is your down payment, anywhere from 10 to 15%. Before the 2008 crisis, when I bought my first apartment in 2007, I paid 10% down, and I took out a second mortgage in the form of a home equity line. These both are pretty not common now with the crisis, because the banks they learned, or they were too loose on their money. Which is it's a good thing that this time around, or this past decline, has been orderly, because there hasn't been a lot of leverage in the system. Banks never really loosened their underwriting guidelines too much. So I would say 90% of my buyers put down 20%. You could put down 10%, but that means you have to pay a higher mortgage rate. So again, 10 to 15%, and then you need to have 2 to 3% of closing costs. That's for resale. If you are going into new construction, closing costs is probably 5 to 6%. But again, this is a buyer's market, especially now. A lot of the sponsors or sellers of new construction will pick up or help you pay a lot of the closing costs. Then a little bit special thing in this particular moment is you need to have some reserve funds, liquidity funds, the money that's not going to go out of your pocket, but you need to be able to show the bank when you apply. And then after you close, the money does not need to be in your account. So this is in terms of the upfront cost. Your team, I think, is quite important. By law, no one is required to hire anyone. For buyer or seller, you can go at this whole process on your own. You don't need to have a broker. You don't need to have an attorney. But I highly recommend both professionals. And it's not because I'm a broker, it's because I've done this for 6 years, and I've seen a lot of cases represented and non-represented. So the value of a broker, which is under a lot of debate now, right? Especially now with the big data, everyone can find everything, and a lot of the buyers are very diligent. They're probably more diligent than their brokers. So it's questionable. So what is the value of a buyer's broker? A buyer's broker's value is twofold. One is in the search process. That's that point that we were talking about. Since this is what I do, so I have a search alert for every buyer client that I work with. And there is a part of my day I go through my alerts and I look at all the new listings that were flagged, and I look at them. And so I curate them. If I think they could be interesting, I send them to my buyers. So the search part is a good broker should be consistent and should be very diligent. And and the first, as soon as a good new listing come on board, you should be notified. And then the second part, that the area where a buyer's broker brings value, which arguably is more important, is in the representation. It is important to have someone that's in the middle of all this to watch your interests, because it's a long process, and usually almost all the deals have some issues, small issues, big issues, and there are decisions that need to be made in the process. Then your broker with all the information, because the broker should have been talking to both attorneys, and the seller's agent, the managing agent. The broker, your broker, buyer's broker, should know a lot of the information, should have all the information. They may not tell you everything, but when time comes to make a certain decision, they need to know exactly where you stand, and the broker should be able to tell you, okay, here are the scenarios you're facing, right? Here are the decisions that you can make, and they should advise you with pros and cons so you can make an educated decision. Um, and a lot of times, this is where I see some of the buyers that are unrepresented, because you have a job, right? You're not doing this as a full-time job, and you do something when some people tell you, okay, do this, but then you don't know. At the end of the day, all transactions close. You buy an apartment, but you don't know if all your interest has been best represented at every step of the way. If you could have saved some money, if you could um, done something differently, you just wouldn't know. So this is a real estate, your buyer's broker is very important. I think everyone should interview a few in the beginning of the process. And then once you decide on one, just stick with that person. Otherwise, it's a waste of time, right? Because you're going to end up getting the same listings from different people. You have to talk to different people, and there's no need. Just choose one that you can trust, that you can hang out with, that you can talk to, and trust that person will watch your interest for you. The mortgage person, there are brokers, there are bankers. The mortgage person is also important. Only one thing I would say about a mortgage person is that person should come recommended by a friend, or better, by your broker or your attorney. Because with these working relationships, the mortgage person will be incentivized to pick up your call after your application is in the bank. Once the application is in the bank, if let's say, I'm not saying it's always going to be the case, you're their business, so they're less incentivized to spend more time with you, to tell you, to update you. But if there is a relationship to think about, they will give you more update. And it's going to be important, especially when it's towards the end. It's almost always the case that the bank is the bottleneck towards the end. When everyone's ready to close, everyone wants to close to move on, your rate lock is about to expire, the bank has not cleared you to close. At that point, it's going to save you so much headache and make you feel so much better when your banker picks you up and tells you where you stand, why you haven't been closed, how long roughly it's still going to be, how many days it's going to be, all that. You're more likely to have that kind of service if the mortgage person comes recommended. And another upside, say someone that I recommend, then that means I can call up that mortgage person any time of the day. I mean, maybe like 11 o'clock at night, to get an update. By now, say I started with I've worked with many mortgage people and real estate attorneys, and I've settled down with a few that I feel comfortable, and I feel like they always do a good job. And we're friends now, right? So I can always call them and tell them to tell me exactly where we stand. So that's a good thing also for the buyer. So I can coordinate all aspects for you. And then that goes same thing for the attorney. Find an attorney that comes recommended. An attorney is relatively inexpensive in the grand scheme of things. If you're buying $1 million apartment, a $500,000 apartment, the attorney fee is anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 or $3,500. An attorney, it's kind of like an assistant administrator in the IT world, right? You don't even know an system administrator exists if your email works, your system works. But if things don't work, then you can't do anything. So this is sort of the attorney for you. If you're lucky enough to be in a good building, in a good transaction with sellers are reasonable, then yes, the attorney doesn't have to fight for you. But if you are in a transaction, which is most like 90% of transactions, there are some issues, then your attorney will be able to tell you on the legal standpoint, what are your options, what are you looking at, exactly where you stand, so you can make an educated decision, right? And they will fight for you. So I think the first three professionals are important, and then you should have three good people on your team. The accountant and the property management are less relevant. They are more for larger investors who have multiple units, so they have more need for accounting and the property management service. This brings us to the end of our talk on the market in light of COVID-19, and then some of the topics for first-time home buyers. If you have any questions, please do reach out to me. Thank you very much for joining me today.